I started my journey as an entrepreneur in the most unlikely way. To be honest, I never planned to run my own business. In fact, I was on a pretty conventional career path right out of college. I landed a solid job at a tech firm where I worked long hours, had a good salary, and even received praise for my work. But something felt off. I was living a life that many would consider ideal, secure job, steady paycheck, but I felt empty. I was stuck in a routine, and every day felt like a grind. It was suffocating, and I began to realize that I wasn't living my own life. I was living someone else's idea of success. The turning point came one night, sitting at my desk after everyone had left. I had just finished a project that took weeks to complete, and the feeling of accomplishment lasted only about 10 minutes before the dread started to creep in. I couldn't stop thinking about the fact that this wasn't my passion. I wasn't contributing to something I truly believed in. It was just another paycheck, another task to cross off the list. That night, I went home and sat down with a journal. I started writing about what I loved to do, what made me feel alive, and what I'd always dreamed of. As the pages filled with ideas, I had a realization. I wanted to create something of my own. I didn't want to work for someone else anymore. I wanted to take a risk, put myself out there, and see if I could build something from scratch. But like most people who dream of starting a business, I had no idea where to begin. The idea of leaving my stable job felt terrifying. The thought of failing, of losing everything, kept me up at night. I didn't have a big safety net or a wealthy family to fall back on. My savings were modest, and I was still paying off student loans. But that sense of dissatisfaction with my current life was louder than my fears. I decided to take the plunge. My first step was to research. I spent hours reading articles, listening to podcasts, and talking to anyone I could find who had gone through the same experience. I knew I needed to find a market that had potential, but also something that genuinely sparked my interest. After months of research, I narrowed it down to the health and wellness space. I'd always been passionate about fitness and personal growth, and I saw a gap in the market for affordable, high-quality nutrition products that actually worked. There were plenty of options out there, but none that felt truly accessible to people who were just getting into fitness. I decided to launch a small supplement line. At the time, I had no background in nutrition or manufacturing. I didn't even know how to approach suppliers or create a product. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I spent the next several months learning everything I could. I reached out to manufacturers, ordered samples, and tested them on myself and friends. Slowly but surely, I began to form a product that I felt good about. It was small, just a protein powder and a few vitamins, but it was something. When it came time to actually launch, I was terrified. I had no clue if people would buy what I was selling. I had limited funds, and I knew I needed to make an impact quickly to justify leaving my job. So, I decided to go all in. I used every spare dollar I had to build a website and started creating content on social media. I posted fitness tips, shared personal stories, and talked about the importance of quality supplements. It wasn't easy, but I kept pushing. And then, something amazing happened. People started to notice. It wasn't instant success by any means, but I saw traction. I got my first sale, then another. Slowly, my following on social media grew. I didn't have any big marketing budget, so everything was organic. I was hustling every day, learning from my mistakes, improving my product, and making adjustments based on customer feedback. The early days were brutal. I spent late nights packing orders, responding to emails, and constantly optimizing my website. I was doing everything myself, but the small wins kept me motivated. Then, one day, I received an email from a well-known influencer in the fitness space. She had tried my protein powder and wanted to partner with me. I almost couldn't believe it. She had hundreds of thousands of followers and a reputation for recommending only the best products. This could be the break I needed. We set up a collaboration, and within days, my sales exploded. It was the first time I saw my business grow exponentially. The influx of orders was overwhelming, but it was the push I needed to believe in myself. After that, things started to snowball. I reinvested every penny into improving my products, expanding my offerings, and marketing. I hired a small team of like-minded individuals who were just as passionate about the mission. Over the next 2 years, we went from a small side hustle to a full-blown business. We launched new products, secured partnerships with more influencers, and even made it into a few brick-and-mortar stores. But it wasn't always smooth sailing. As the business grew, so did the challenges. I had to learn how to manage cash flow, deal with supply chain issues, and balance work and life in a way that didn't burn me out. There were moments when I questioned if it was worth it, especially when things didn't go according to plan. We had setbacks, product recalls, and even a few PR disasters. But the one thing that kept me going was the knowledge that I was building something real, something that could make a difference in people's lives. Looking back, I'm amazed at how far I've come. I'm not a millionaire, but I've built a sustainable business that I'm proud of. I've created jobs, impacted lives, and most importantly, I wake up every day doing something I love. The road to entrepreneurship is never easy, but I wouldn't change a thing. I've learned more about myself in the past few years than I ever did working a traditional job. If there's one piece of advice I could give to aspiring entrepreneurs, it's this: you don't have to know everything before you start. In fact, you won't know everything, and that's okay. The key is to take that first step, learn as you go, and never give up. You'll face challenges, and it will be hard, but if you're passionate about your mission and willing to put in the work, the rewards can be incredible. I never thought I'd be here. I never thought I'd be an entrepreneur. But now, I can't imagine doing anything else. Every day is a new opportunity to grow, learn, and create something bigger than myself. And that's the most fulfilling thing I could ask for. If you enjoyed the video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps the content grow and motivates me to create even more great videos. Turn on notifications so you don't miss any new uploads. By the way, I'm curious, when do you usually watch my videos? While working, studying, or just relaxing at home? Let me know in the comments. I'd love to hear from you. Thank you for your support. I was 28 when I finally took the leap into entrepreneurship. It wasn't some grand moment where I woke up and decided I was going to build a multi-million-dollar business from the ground up. No, it was a culmination of years of frustration, the kind of frustration that made me feel like I wasn't living up to my potential. I had been stuck in a corporate job for 6 years, climbing the ladder at a company that didn't care about me or my ideas. They were happy to pay me a decent salary, but I felt like I was just a cog in the machine. When you're constantly told to keep your head down and follow orders, it slowly eats away at your sense of autonomy. And that's when I decided it was time to leave. I had always wanted to start a business, but like most people, I didn't have the guts to jump in. I had the ideas, the drive, but I lacked the confidence. Fear of failure was my constant companion. What if I failed? What if I lost everything? What if I ended up worse than where I started? Those questions haunted me every day. So, I kept working, kept collecting a steady paycheck, and kept pushing my dreams aside. It was one night, sitting in my tiny one-bedroom apartment, scrolling through LinkedIn, when something clicked. I had been reading about people who had dropped out of college, started small side hustles, and within a couple of years had turned them into successful businesses. They weren't geniuses. They weren't doing anything groundbreaking. They were just taking the plunge, one small step at a time. So why not me? I had always been good at sales and had a knack for understanding customer needs. After a lot of thought, I decided to start an online business. I'd sell custom-made office supplies. No one was offering anything truly unique in this space, and I knew there was a market for it. I started by researching suppliers, figuring out which products I wanted to sell, and sketching out a business plan. I didn't have a lot of savings, but I wasn't looking to invest thousands of dollars up front. I just needed enough to get the website up and running and buy the first round of inventory. I'll be honest, the first few months were brutal. I had no idea what I was doing, but I learned quickly. I remember spending nights watching YouTube tutorials on how to set up an e-commerce website and how to create compelling product descriptions. I also spent a lot of time reading about SEO, trying to figure out how to get my site noticed on Google. I didn't have a marketing budget, so everything had to be done organically. I joined online communities, posted on Reddit, and tried to connect with potential customers. I didn't care how small the audience was. I just needed someone to pay attention. One of the first big challenges I encountered was shipping. I hadn't realized how much of an issue logistics would be. My first shipment came in, and I realized I had miscalculated the storage requirements. The boxes piled up in my living room, and I had no idea how I was going to fulfill orders. I ended up using my weekends to pack and ship each order manually, printing labels from home. I had to juggle this with my full-time job, which meant sleepless nights and a lot of caffeine. The first sale came about 3 weeks after launching. It was a small order, but it felt like a huge victory. That's when I realized this was real. People were actually buying from me. My website was live, and my products were in the hands of customers. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make me believe that maybe I could make this work. But it wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. I made a lot of mistakes in the first year. I overestimated demand, which meant I had more inventory than I could move. Some of my early marketing campaigns were complete flops. I didn't know how to use social media effectively, and I didn't have the budget for paid ads. I also underestimated the competition. There were other players in the market who had been around longer, had better resources, and were able to offer lower prices. It was frustrating, to say the least. There were moments when I thought about quitting. The stress of trying to balance a full-time job and a fledgling business was overwhelming. Some days, I would come home from work, sit down to check my sales, and see that nothing had changed. The reality of being an entrepreneur is that it's a grind. There's no one handing you a check every 2 weeks. No set schedule. Just the relentless pressure to keep pushing forward. But I stuck with it. Slowly, things started to improve. I learned how to use Instagram and Facebook more effectively, and I started reaching out to influencers who had the right audience. I began offering discounts and bundles to increase the average order value. I also expanded my product range, offering personalized office supplies that I knew would resonate with customers. The breakthrough came when I decided to invest in a professional website redesign. I hired a freelance developer who helped me create a more user-friendly, modern design. The new site gave me more credibility, and within months of launching it, my conversion rate improved significantly. People trusted me more, and the orders started coming in. I eventually quit my day job after about 18 months of running the business on the side. By then, I had a solid customer base, and the business was generating enough revenue to support me full-time. I moved into a small warehouse and hired my first employee, a fulfillment specialist, to help with shipping and inventory management. It felt surreal, but also terrifying. I was no longer just a solo entrepreneur. I had employees to worry about, and I had to learn how to be a manager. The business continued to grow, and over the next few years, I expanded my product line to include other office-related items, such as ergonomic furniture and tech accessories. We scaled up our marketing efforts, focusing on targeted ads and building an email list. At one point, we even had a viral campaign thanks to a quirky social media post. Our Instagram following exploded, and we gained thousands of new customers overnight. Fast forward to today, and the business is thriving. We've expanded internationally, and we're now a recognized brand in the office supply industry. It's not easy, and there are still challenges every day, but I'm proud of what I've built. I now employ a team of 25 people, and we're consistently growing. More than anything, though, I'm proud that I took that first step, despite all my fears, doubts, and the unknown. Looking back, I realized that the key to success wasn't some magic formula or a brilliant idea. It was about persistence, learning from mistakes, and never giving up. If you're thinking about starting a business, my advice is simple. Start now. Don't wait until everything is perfect because it never will be. You'll figure it out along the way. This is the story of how I went from working in a 9 to 5 job to building my own successful business, overcoming obstacles, and ultimately achieving the freedom I always dreamed of. I'm not a genius. I didn't have a big startup fund, and I didn't even have an entrepreneurial background. But I did have a hunger for success and a willingness to learn, and those two things changed my life. A little backstory. I graduated college with a degree in marketing. I always thought I'd work in a corporate setting, climbing the ladder, maybe becoming a VP one day. But somewhere along the way, I realized that corporate life wasn't for me. I worked for a big marketing firm for a couple of years, but the daily grind started to feel draining. It wasn't the work itself. I enjoyed marketing, but the environment just wasn't where I wanted to spend my life. Sitting in the same office, working for the same clients, going through the same motions day in and day out was starting to kill my spirit. The tipping point came during a company-wide meeting. I remember sitting there, listening to my boss talk about all the goals for the next quarter, and I realized something. There I was, at the mercy of someone else's plan, someone else's vision, and someone else's expectations. The whole idea of building my dreams on someone else's agenda just didn't sit well with me anymore. That day, I decided to make a change. I didn't know what I wanted to do yet, but I knew it was time to get out of the corporate world. The idea of starting my own business began to take shape. The problem was, I had no idea where to start. I spent the next few months researching different business models. I looked at everything: dropshipping, affiliate marketing, content creation, and even brick-and-mortar stores. I had a passion for health and fitness, so I thought about starting a gym, but the upfront costs were just too high. Eventually, I stumbled upon the idea of starting an online marketing agency. It seemed perfect. It was something I could start with relatively low costs, and it aligned well with my background in marketing. But, like most people, I had zero business experience. I didn't know where to begin. So, I did what any self-respecting millennial would do. I started Googling. I read articles, watched YouTube videos, and followed business blogs. Slowly but surely, I started learning about business formation, client acquisition, contracts, and all the ins and outs of running an agency. It was overwhelming, but I kept pushing forward. I decided to take the leap and register my business. I didn't have a fancy office or staff. It was just me and a laptop at the kitchen table. I used my savings to get the essentials: a website, a business email, and a phone line. My first step was to find clients. I started by reaching out to local businesses that I thought might need help with marketing. I didn't have a portfolio, so I offered them a deal. I'd do the work for free in exchange for a testimonial. Looking back, that was probably one of the smartest moves I made. Sure, I was giving away my time, but I was also building up a portfolio and proving to future clients that I knew what I was doing. After a few months of hustling and grinding, I started getting some paid work. At first, it was small gigs, but they were enough to keep me going. Slowly, I started building relationships and getting referrals. But things didn't get easier right away. In fact, it felt like every day was a new obstacle. I remember one month when my rent was due, and I had barely any income coming in. I had to borrow money from a friend just to make sure I didn't lose my apartment. There were days when I'd wake up at 5 a.m. to work on proposals, and then spend the rest of the day on client calls or doing the actual work. I was constantly juggling multiple hats: marketing, sales, accounting, customer service, you name it. The worst part was when I lost my first big client. I had worked with them for months, and I thought everything was going well. Then one day, they just decided to cut ties. It was devastating. I had put so much time and effort into them, and losing them felt like a personal failure. But that setback taught me a valuable lesson. You can't rely on just one client, and you need to constantly be filling your pipeline. So I got back to work. I doubled down on client outreach, optimized my processes, and refined my pitch. I also started learning more about how to scale a business. I realized that if I wanted to grow, I had to delegate and hire people. I started outsourcing some of the tasks I wasn't good at: graphic design, copywriting, and web development. This allowed me to focus on what I did best: running the business and acquiring clients. After a few years of hard work, I finally reached a tipping point. My agency was bringing in consistent revenue, and I had a small team that was helping me with the workload. I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck anymore. I had learned to manage cash flow, scale the business, and build systems that allowed me to step away from the day-to-day grind. Looking back, I realized that the journey was anything but linear. There were moments where I thought I would fail, where I questioned whether this was all worth it. But I kept pushing through the tough times, and those challenges ultimately made me stronger. The biggest thing I learned through this whole process was that there is no magic formula for success. It's about hard work, persistence, and constantly learning and adapting. Today, my agency is thriving, and I'm living the life I always wanted. I'm not tied down to a 9 to 5. I have the freedom to work from anywhere, and I'm building something that's truly mine. But most importantly, I've learned that success isn't just about money or status. It's about the ability to control your own destiny and create the life you want to live. If there's one thing I want people to take away from this story, it's that no matter where you start, no matter how many times you fail, you can build something great if you're willing to work for it. The road isn't easy, but the rewards are worth it. Don't let fear hold you back. Take the leap, learn as you go, and keep pushing forward. Success doesn't happen overnight, but with persistence, anything is possible. So, I want to share my entrepreneurial journey with you all. It's been a long, challenging road, and I think it might resonate with those of you who are just starting out or are in the middle of building something. I've gone through some serious highs and lows, but at the end of the day, I wouldn't change a thing. It all started back when I was 24. I had just graduated from college with a degree in business management. To be honest, I didn't really know what I wanted to do with my life. I dabbled in a few internships, done some part-time work, but nothing ever really stuck. It wasn't until I found myself in a dead-end job at a tech startup that I realized I wanted to do more than just clock in and out every day. I wasn't happy. I felt like I was wasting my potential. One evening, as I was scrolling through Reddit, ironically, I came across a post about someone who had turned a small hobby into a thriving business. They had no prior experience, just an idea and a lot of determination. That was the spark for me. I realized that I could take my love for design, which had always been a side passion, and build something from it. I wanted to create a company that focused on custom branding for small businesses, something I hadn't seen done well at the time. So, I quit my job. It was terrifying, to say the least. I had saved up enough money to survive for about 6 months without an income, but that was it. I didn't know if I was making a huge mistake, but something deep down told me that it was now or never. For the first few months, I was working out of my tiny apartment. I didn't have a fancy office. I didn't even have much equipment. I started with just a laptop, a cheap design software, and a basic website. I didn't have clients, so I spent my days creating mock-ups and concepts for businesses that didn't exist. I posted my designs online and asked for feedback from other designers and potential clients. It wasn't glamorous. It wasn't easy. But slowly, very slowly, things started to click. I got my first real project, a local coffee shop that wanted a new logo. I was nervous as hell, but I took it on. I spent hours making sure every little detail was perfect. When I presented it to the owner, he loved it. He hired me to do more work for him. That was my first taste of success. It wasn't much, but it was something real. From there, things started snowballing. I reached out to other small businesses, offering them discounts in exchange for testimonials and referrals. Word of mouth began to spread, and I started getting more clients. I focused on providing a high-quality service and really understood my clients' needs. I didn't just want to make cool logos. I wanted to make sure the branding I created was aligned with their business goals. That approach made a huge difference. It wasn't just design, it was strategy. As I gained more experience, I decided to scale up. I needed help. I hired a small team of freelancers, each specializing in different areas: copywriting, web development, and social media. We worked out of my apartment at first, and while it was cramped, the energy was amazing. We were a small, nimble team that could deliver high-quality results quickly. Things weren't always smooth, though. We hit some rough patches. There was the time when one of our biggest clients abruptly canceled a project halfway through. I had to eat the cost of a lot of hours worked, and I felt like I was back at square one. That was a tough month. I remember thinking, maybe this is it. Maybe I'm just not cut out for this. But I refused to give up. I focused on getting the next client, even if it meant offering deep discounts to get my foot in the door. Then there was the time when a major competitor tried to poach one of my clients with a lower offer. They were offering half the price of what I was charging, but I refused to lower my prices. Instead, I doubled down on the quality of my work. I kept communication clear, maintained my professionalism, and ensured my clients knew the value they were getting. To my surprise, the client stuck with me. They appreciated the quality and service I was offering. That was a huge win. As my business grew, I started attending networking events. At first, I felt like an outsider. Everyone else seemed to know what they were doing, and I felt like I was just faking it. But the more I went to these events, the more I realized how many people were just like me, trying to make something work. That's when I met one of my now closest business partners, Sarah. She was running a content marketing agency, and we quickly realized that our businesses could complement each other. We started collaborating on projects, referring clients to each other, and sharing resources. This partnership was a game changer. It allowed us to expand our service offerings and take on bigger clients. Fast forward a few years, and my company is doing well. We've expanded beyond just branding and now offer full-service marketing solutions. We've got a solid team of 12 full-time employees and several contractors. We're working with clients across multiple industries, from tech startups to local restaurants to e-commerce brands. And while the work is still demanding, it feels different now. It feels like I've built something that can stand on its own. But here's the thing. It hasn't been a linear path. There's no such thing as overnight success. There were plenty of sleepless nights, mistakes, and setbacks along the way. And even now, there are days when I doubt myself, when I wonder if I've made the right decisions or if things are going to fall apart. But that's part of the journey. Entrepreneurship is all about learning from those challenges, picking yourself back up, and keeping going. Looking back, I'm proud of how far I've come, but I'm even more excited about where I'm going. There's so much more I want to do, and I can't wait to see where this business will take me. I know there will be more bumps in the road, but I've learned that's just part of the process. For anyone thinking about starting their own business, my advice is this: go for it. If you have a passion, a vision, and the determination to make it work, you can make it happen. Don't expect it to be easy. and don't expect it to happen overnight. But if you're willing to put in the work, it can be the most rewarding thing you'll ever do. So that's my story. Thanks for reading, and I hope it helps someone out there who's struggling to find the courage to take the leap. If you have any questions, feel free to ask. I started my business out of a dire need for something that didn't exist yet. It's crazy to think that what began as a passion project has now turned into a company with dozens of employees, a thriving customer base, and, most importantly, the kind of freedom I never thought possible when I was starting out. Let me take you back to where it all began. In 2014, I was stuck in a job that I hated. I was working as a marketing assistant for a mid-sized digital agency in the city. On the outside, it looked like everything was fine. I was getting paid decent money, had a stable position, and I was surrounded by talented people. But something felt off. Every day was the same. Wake up, work, come home, rinse and repeat. The hours were long, and my boss, while nice, had very little understanding of work-life balance. At first, I told myself it was just a phase. Everyone goes through this, right? But after a couple of years, I realized I was miserable. The 9-to-5 grind was draining me mentally and physically. I was living paycheck to paycheck, and I just couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to life than this. The dream of becoming an entrepreneur was something I had been chasing since college, but I had no idea how to even begin. One day, during my lunch break, I walked into a small bookstore nearby, hoping to find something to distract myself from the monotony of my daily routine. I was browsing through a shelf of self-help books when a title caught my eye, The Lean Startup by Eric Rice. It was like the universe had just handed me a blueprint for my future. I picked it up, read the back cover, and decided to give it a try. That book changed everything. The concept of building a startup with minimum resources, testing ideas quickly, and iterating based on customer feedback sounded like exactly what I needed. I went back home that night, ordered the book, and devoured it in 2 days. I began researching everything I could about entrepreneurship, how to start, how to raise money, how to grow a business. My mind was racing with ideas, but one particular problem kept popping up in my head. Why don't we have an easy way to track personal finances? I had always struggled with managing my own money. I could never keep up with bills, subscriptions, and all the small expenses that added up throughout the month. I had tried using traditional budgeting apps, but they were either too complicated, too time-consuming, or just plain ineffective. I wanted something simple, something that could give me a clear picture of where my money was going and how to save more without the headache of constantly updating spreadsheets. That was when it hit me. There was a gap in the market. There was a need for a user-friendly personal finance app that could automate the tracking of expenses, set reminders for payments, and provide easy-to-understand reports on financial health. I didn't have the skills to build an app myself, but I knew how to communicate ideas, and I was determined to make this happen. The first step was figuring out how to make it real. I didn't have a large budget, so I decided to work with a freelancer to help build a basic prototype. It was a huge risk, taking money out of my savings for something that might fail. But at that point, I had nothing to lose. I spent months learning how to effectively communicate my idea to the developer, tweaking designs, and creating rough wireframes. It was frustrating at times. The app didn't work as expected, features had to be scrapped, and bugs would appear when I least expected it. But the idea was always in my head, and I couldn't give up. Once the basic version of the app was ready, I decided to take a leap of faith and launch it, even though I knew it was far from perfect. I didn't have much of a budget for marketing, so I reached out to my network, shared the app with friends and family, and asked for honest feedback. The response was positive, but I quickly learned that building an app wasn't the same as building a business. The first few months were a struggle. We had very few users, and the revenue was almost non-existent. I spent countless nights learning about customer acquisition, growth hacking, and how to make an app stick. I was also working full-time, so my days were spent juggling my job and my business. My friends would joke that I had 2 full-time jobs, but at that point, it felt more like one job I hated and one that was giving me a glimmer of hope. But I kept at it. I listened to every piece of feedback I could get. I tweaked the app based on user needs, and I kept my marketing efforts focused on solving one problem, making personal finance management as easy as possible. Slowly but surely, the user base began to grow. At the time, I was still working my full-time job, but I had already made the decision that I was going to take the leap into full-time entrepreneurship. My goal wasn't just to have a small side hustle, it was to build something that would allow me to create the kind of lifestyle I dreamed of. After about a year of side hustle work, I finally reached the point where I felt comfortable enough to quit my job and go all in. Quitting wasn't easy. I had a steady paycheck, health insurance, and a relatively comfortable life. But the moment I made the decision, everything changed. I felt more alive than I had in years. I spent the next few months working 16-hour days, constantly tweaking and iterating on the app. I started investing in paid ads, SEO, and influencer marketing to get the word out. Slowly, things began to click. By the end of the second year, the app had a steady user base and was generating enough revenue for me to hire a small team. The first employee I hired was a marketing specialist who helped me scale the user acquisition strategy. After that, we brought on a customer support representative and a product manager. I spent every dollar I earned reinvesting in the business, keeping the growth going. Now, 5 years later, I have a team of 30 people working across design, development, marketing, and customer support. The app has hundreds of thousands of active users and is one of the top-rated personal finance apps in the market. We've expanded into other areas like budgeting tools and financial education, and our user base continues to grow exponentially. It hasn't been easy. There have been countless setbacks, moments of doubt, and sleepless nights. But every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself why I started: to create something meaningful, to solve a real problem, and to build a life on my own terms. Looking back, I don't recognize the person who was stuck in that 9-to-5 job. The journey has been incredibly challenging, but I wouldn't change a thing. Entrepreneurship isn't for everyone, but for me, it's been the most rewarding decision I've ever made. So, here's my story of how I went from barely scraping by to building a successful business. It wasn't some magic formula or overnight success, just a combination of grit, hustle, and, honestly, a lot of trial and error. I grew up in a small town where the biggest excitement was seeing who could drink the most beer at the local dive bar on Friday nights. My family wasn't poor, but we certainly weren't wealthy either. We were middle class, and for that reason, the idea of becoming an entrepreneur seemed like something only rich people or people with connections could do. I went through school, didn't really stand out, and went to a local college because it was cheaper. I figured that would be my way out, but the world didn't work that way. During college, I worked part-time at a local coffee shop just to make ends meet. That's where I had my first taste of customer service, and I hated it. I was a decent barista, but I never really enjoyed the interaction with customers. The tips were good, but the stress and constant pace were draining. I started thinking about what it would be like to run my own business, but the thought of actually being the one responsible for it all terrified me. I didn't know the first thing about starting a company, but I knew one thing: I didn't want to be stuck in that coffee shop forever. After graduation, I found a job in a corporate marketing department at a decent salary. It wasn't glamorous, but it was steady. However, after a few months of sitting in meetings, trying to make things work with marketing strategies that seemed outdated and too rigid, I realized that corporate life wasn't for me. It felt like being a cog in a wheel with no control over where I was going. Every morning, I'd sit at my desk, looking at the clock, counting the minutes until the end of the day. I wanted to be my own boss, but I had no clue how to start. I started doing research, reading books on entrepreneurship, watching YouTube videos, and subscribing to podcasts. It was overwhelming, but it got me thinking about side hustles. I didn't have much money saved up, but I had some time and a lot of ambition. I'd always had a passion for fitness, so I decided to launch an online fitness coaching business. I knew I wasn't the most experienced trainer, but I figured I could offer something different, personalized. One-on-one coaching combined with nutritional advice, something I hadn't really seen in the space before. To start, I created an Instagram account, built a small following, and started offering free advice on fitness and diet. I didn't expect to make much money, but I wanted to establish myself as an authority. I spent countless hours building content, responding to direct messages, and offering free consultations. Slowly, I started gaining a small group of loyal clients, but I had to keep my day job to survive. I worked 40 hours a week in the marketing department and spent another 20 to 30 hours after work coaching people online. This was the first time I really learned about hustle. I was working nonstop, day and night. My sleep suffered, my social life practically disappeared, and I was constantly running on fumes. I made all kinds of mistakes, bad business decisions, poor financial choices, and wrong advice to clients that hurt my reputation, but I learned quickly. I spent all my free time researching better ways to serve my clients, watching webinars, and testing out new strategies. Slowly, I figured out what worked and what didn't. After about 6 months of grinding, I started seeing a steady stream of income from my coaching business. It wasn't enough to quit my day job yet, but it was getting close. That was the tipping point for me. I was exhausted, but I realized that if I could just give this business more time, I could scale it. I made the jump. I quit my corporate job and went full-time with my coaching business. The first few months were terrifying. It was all on me now. If I didn't get clients, I didn't get paid. But something clicked. I kept showing up, kept improving my services, and gradually, I built a reputation. Clients came in, referrals started pouring in, and I saw real financial growth. It was an incredible feeling to know I had built something from the ground up. But just as things were starting to look good, the pandemic hit. The entire fitness industry went into a tailspin. Gyms closed, people were forced into quarantine, and nobody was buying online coaching. I lost a ton of clients almost overnight. My revenue plummeted, and I thought it might be the end of my business. I was devastated. However, after a few weeks of feeling sorry for myself, I decided to adapt instead of giving up. I switched gears and started focusing on creating online fitness courses. It took a lot of time, but eventually, I launched a program that combined fitness coaching, meal plans, and mindset coaching all wrapped up in a beautifully designed online platform. I used the time I had during the lockdown to really think through the entire customer experience. It wasn't enough to just sell a workout plan. I had to offer a solution to their entire fitness journey. Surprisingly, the course started to gain traction. The pandemic had shifted people's priorities, and more people were looking for at-home fitness solutions. My business started picking up again, and this time, it was more sustainable. I wasn't reliant on one-on-one coaching anymore, and I could offer a product that didn't require my constant presence. From there, I took it even further. I expanded into nutrition coaching, launched a subscription-based membership model, and eventually hired a small team to help with marketing and content creation. Now, 3 years later, my business is thriving. It's not easy, and there are still days when I question whether it's all worth it. But when I look at how far I've come, from that small idea in my apartment to where I am today, I can't help but feel proud. So, to anyone out there thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple: just start. It's going to suck at first. You're going to make a lot of mistakes, lose money, and wonder if it's worth it. But if you're willing to work harder than you ever have before and learn from your mistakes, there's a good chance you'll succeed. And if you're lucky, one day you'll look back and realize you've built something that's all your own. This is the story of how I built a 6-figure business from my bedroom with no capital, a lot of failure, and a stubbornness to never give up. Let me start by saying that I had no clue what I was doing when I first started. It was 2016, and I had just graduated from college with a degree in business. I didn't really know what direction I wanted to take my career, and honestly, I didn't feel like the traditional 9-to-5 was the right fit for me. The thought of sitting in an office all day, every day, just felt suffocating. So, I decided to try my hand at entrepreneurship, although I had no experience, no mentor, and frankly, no real plan. I was living with my parents at the time, and it was the perfect setup to experiment. I had a roof over my head, food on the table, and zero responsibilities. So, I figured I might as well go for it. The first idea I had was to create a social media marketing agency. I had been reading a lot of blogs and watching YouTube videos about how to run ads on Facebook and Instagram. So I thought, hey, why not help local businesses grow their presence online? I had no real experience, just a bit of theory from online resources, but I thought I could make it work. I spent hours every day learning how to create ads, optimize landing pages, and track conversions. Then, I started reaching out to local businesses in my area, restaurants, gyms, real estate agents, you name it. I sent cold emails, called them up, and even walked into a few places with my pitch. Most of the time, I got laughed at or ignored. But occasionally, someone would take me seriously, and I'd land a client. The first client I signed was a small, local gym. They had a terrible website. Their social media looked like it was from 2010, and they weren't running any ads. I pitched them a comprehensive plan, a new website, social media management, and a targeted Facebook ads campaign. After a lot of back and forth, they agreed to a modest budget. I went all in on this project, working day and night to create a brand new website and set up ad campaigns. The first few weeks were rough. My ads weren't converting well, and the website had more bugs than I'd like to admit. But I kept tweaking everything, adjusting the copy, optimizing the ads, and constantly testing new approaches. Slowly but surely, things started to click. About 2 months in, the gym saw a 40% increase in membership. They were thrilled, and I was over the moon. They paid me the agreed-upon fee, but more importantly, they were now a raving fan of my services. They referred me to other local businesses, and before I knew it, I had a few more clients under my belt. I was starting to make real money, and for the first time, I felt like I might actually be good at this. But that's when the first major setback hit. I got too cocky. I had a few clients, I was making a steady income, and I felt like I had the formula figured out. So, I started raising my prices. I thought that since I was getting good results, I could charge more and more for my services. But I made a huge mistake. I didn't build the infrastructure to support that kind of growth. I didn't have systems in place to handle more clients efficiently. I didn't have a team. I was doing everything myself, creating content, running ads, managing websites, and dealing with client communication. It didn't take long before I was completely overwhelmed. The quality of my work started slipping, and my clients started noticing. One by one, I lost almost every single client I had worked so hard to get. That was a crushing blow. I had just tasted success, and now it was slipping away. I was back at square one. The worst part was that I had no one to blame but myself. I had let my ambition cloud my judgment. For a while, I considered quitting. I felt like maybe I wasn't cut out for this after all. But after a few weeks of sulking, I decided to try again. But this time, I was going to be smarter about it. I realized that I had to scale my business properly, not just throw money at the problem and hope it worked out. So, I took a step back and restructured everything. I focused on improving my skill set, getting better at managing client relationships, and investing in the right tools to streamline the work. I also started learning about the importance of systems and processes, which was something I had completely overlooked before. Instead of trying to offer everything to everyone, I narrowed my focus. I specialized in running Facebook ads for gyms and fitness businesses. I figured if I could repeat my success with that first gym, I could scale it. I began developing a more specific and structured approach that I could easily replicate for each client. I learned to set clear expectations with my clients and establish better communication to ensure I wasn't overwhelmed. Over the next year, I rebuilt my client base, but this time, I was much more cautious. I kept my prices competitive but didn't overextend myself. I also started outsourcing certain tasks to freelancers, which freed up my time to focus on strategy and client acquisition. Slowly but surely, I started growing again, but this time, I was doing it the right way. Fast forward to today, and I've built a successful digital marketing agency that brings in over $300,000 a year. I have a team of 6 people, and we serve fitness businesses all across the country. We've scaled in a way that's sustainable, and I've learned the importance of focusing on quality over quantity. Looking back, I can see just how much I've grown, from the kid with no experience to someone who has created something that I'm truly proud of. The journey hasn't been easy. There were plenty of sleepless nights, tons of mistakes, and a lot of moments when I doubted myself. But through persistence, I managed to build something from nothing. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that failure is a part of the process. The key isn't avoiding failure, it's learning from it and using it to grow. I failed multiple times, but each time I got up, I was stronger, smarter, and more determined. And while I'm not done yet, I'm proud of how far I've come. To anyone thinking about starting their own business, my advice is simple: don't give up after your first failure. Don't get complacent when things are going well. Keep learning, keep improving, and always be willing to adapt. It's not going to be easy, but if you stay committed and work smarter, you'll get there. I'm an entrepreneur, and this is the story of how I built my business from scratch, failed, and built it back up again, stronger than before. It all started in my small apartment, with little more than a computer, a dream, and a willingness to fail. At 24, I had no clue what I was doing, but I knew I wanted to create something of my own, something that would make an impact. Let's rewind to the beginning. I had just finished university with a degree in marketing. I didn't get the top grades, but I managed to scrape through with decent enough results. I worked a couple of dead-end jobs in marketing at small firms, but none of them felt like the right fit. I wanted to be my own boss, to create my own destiny, not work for someone else's dreams. So, in 2017, I decided to take the plunge and start my own company. I had saved up a modest amount of money, enough to survive for a few months if things went terribly wrong. My initial plan was simple: create an e-commerce platform that could sell lifestyle products targeted at young professionals like myself. You know, Things like cool tech gadgets, office accessories, and quirky home decor. I wanted to make something that would make everyday life a little easier and more fun. I spent the first few weeks researching, learning everything I could about e-commerce. I devoured blog posts, took online courses, and even reached out to a few people in the industry to get advice. Everyone told me the same thing. Don't start this unless you're fully committed. The competition is fierce, and you'll need to work harder than ever before. I was determined, though. I wasn't about to back down. I found a supplier that seemed trustworthy, set up my website with Shopify, and got to work on branding. I remember spending countless hours on the logo, the color scheme, and the design of the website. Every little detail felt crucial. I launched the site with only a handful of products, but I figured that it was better to start small and scale later. The big day came, and I felt a rush of excitement. My store was live. And then, nothing happened. I had no sales, no traffic. My friends and family shared the website on social media, but that didn't help much. I was getting discouraged quickly. The reality hit me hard. Just having a product and a website wasn't enough. I had missed a critical step: marketing. My advertising was non-existent, and I was trying to rely on organic traffic, which, as any experienced entrepreneur will tell you, is not a sustainable strategy. I spent the next few months learning about Facebook ads, Instagram marketing, and SEO. I revamped my ad strategies, and slowly, things started to pick up. I made my first sale after 2 months, and though it was just one, it felt like a victory. I celebrated like I had just won a championship. But the truth was, that first sale was a fluke. The product didn't move much after that. I kept pushing, tweaking my strategies, experimenting with different approaches. Eventually, I got a product that started to gain traction. It was a high-quality portable speaker that was affordable but looked expensive. I pushed it hard on social media, worked with influencers, and used customer reviews to build trust. Slowly, my store started to grow, but it wasn't smooth sailing by any means. In 2018, a huge turning point happened. My store had gained some momentum, but I was still struggling financially. I couldn't afford to keep buying inventory, and I had to rely on credit cards to fund the next batch of products. That's when I made my first big mistake. I ordered too much inventory, way too much. The speakers sold well at first, but then the sales plateaued. I was sitting on thousands of dollars worth of unsold inventory, and the credit card bills were piling up. I didn't know how to move the stock, and every day felt like I was drowning in debt. I had no safety net left, and I began questioning if I had made the biggest mistake of my life. That's when I almost gave up. I thought I could just shut the business down, sell the stock at a loss, and return to a normal life. But instead, I did what I now think was the most important thing I could have done. I asked for help. I reached out to a mentor who had experience in e-commerce. I'd met him at a conference a year earlier, and while we hadn't kept in touch much, I felt desperate. He agreed to have a call with me. I poured out my struggles, and he listened. He told me that my products were good, but that my marketing was still way off. He advised me to rethink my approach, start small again, and focus on a niche audience. I took his advice to heart. I pivoted the brand to target tech-savvy professionals who were into outdoor activities, hiking, biking, and traveling. The speaker I had was perfect for that demographic, but I had been marketing it to everyone. I built a new ad campaign specifically for this group and started to focus on high-quality content and real-world applications of the product. It worked. Slowly, but surely, the sales came back. In 2019, I began to see consistent growth. I was still working out of my apartment, barely making enough to cover the bills, but I had a renewed sense of purpose. I focused all my energy on social media content, product demos, user-generated content, and influencer collaborations. I started to connect with a community of like-minded people, and the business began to thrive. By the end of 2020, I had managed to pay off my debt, and my company was profitable for the first time. My revenue had grown exponentially, and I started reinvesting into the business, expanding my product line. By the time the pandemic hit, my brand had solidified its place in the market, and the world's shift to online shopping played right into my hands. Fast forward to 2023, and my company is no longer a side hustle, it's a full-fledged operation. I've hired a small team, and we've expanded into new product categories. We've even started selling internationally. My net worth has grown substantially, and while I don't have a massive mansion or flashy cars, I'm not about that life. I'm proud of what I've built. Looking back, I realized that the biggest mistake I made was not asking for help sooner. The second biggest mistake? underestimating the power of niching down. I tried to be everything to everyone, and that doesn't work in business. It's much more effective to build a brand around a specific audience, and I wish I had figured that out sooner. In the end, I'm grateful for the challenges I faced. If I hadn't gone through the tough times, the bankruptcy risk, the inventory mistakes, the sleepless nights, I wouldn't have learned the lessons that helped me succeed. Entrepreneurship isn't a straight line. It's messy, unpredictable, and full of setbacks. But if you keep pushing, adapt quickly, and learn from your mistakes, you can build something great. So if you're reading this and thinking about starting your own business, go for it. But be prepared to fail, be prepared to learn, and most importantly, be prepared to ask for help when you need it. Hey, friends, if you enjoy this content, don't forget to like the video and share your thoughts in the comments. We really want to know what you like and what can be improved. What do you think of the video? Are there any topics you'd like to see in future videos? Your feedback really helps us get better. Thanks for being with us. I've been in business for over 10 years now, but my journey to entrepreneurship wasn't a straight line. There were a lot of bumps along the way, moments where I thought I'd lost everything, and times when I felt I was just one mistake away from failure. This is my story of how I went from struggling with a 9-to-5 job I hated to building a business that not only provided financial freedom, but gave me the kind of life I never thought possible. My story starts in a small town where I grew up, in a family that valued hard work above all else. My parents worked multiple jobs, and the only idea of success they had was securing a stable job and climbing the corporate ladder. I bought into that idea for a long time, and like most people, I went to college, studied something practical, and started my first full-time job after graduation. It was supposed to be the start of my adult life, a stepping stone to the American dream. But the reality? It was nothing like I imagined. I worked at a mid-sized corporate company in a dull cubicle, and each day felt like I was just waiting to get through another 8 hours before I could escape. Every morning was a struggle to leave my bed, and every evening was a reminder that I was stuck in a life that wasn't fulfilling. It wasn't that the job itself was terrible, it just wasn't the life I wanted. I'd spend my evenings reading about entrepreneurship, and I'd get all excited about the idea of building something of my own. But every time I'd sit down to work on a business idea, doubt would creep in. What if it didn't work out? What if I was just a regular person with big dreams and no real skills? The self-doubt was crippling. One day, something shifted. I just finished a grueling week at work, and I was sitting in my car after leaving the office. It was a typical Friday, the kind where you're just so burned out that you feel physically drained. But as I sat there, I realized something. I couldn't keep doing this. I couldn't keep going to a job I hated just to pay the bills. If I didn't take control of my life, no one else would. I remember calling my best friend that night, feeling like I was on the edge of a major decision. I told him I was thinking about starting my own business. He laughed at first because I had no experience, no real connections, and no idea where to start. But then, as the conversation went on, I realized something. It didn't matter if I had no experience. It didn't matter if I had no money. What mattered was that I had the drive, the willingness to learn, and the hunger to create something for myself. So, I quit my job. I know, it sounds insane, right? To leave a steady job with benefits, especially in a time when people talk about the safety of corporate life. But I didn't see the point in staying if I wasn't living a life that I wanted. For the first time, I felt alive. Sure, I was terrified, but I also felt free. It was like I was on the edge of a cliff, and I had no choice but to jump. The next few months were a blur. I had no business plan, no real strategy, just a burning desire to make something work. I started small, really small. My first business idea was a digital marketing consultancy. I figured I could help small businesses with their online presence since I had learned a lot about SEO, social media, and email marketing during my late-night reading sessions. I set up a website, which was awful at first, and created a few social media profiles. My goal was simple: reach out to as many small businesses as possible, offer them my services, and hope for the best. The first few months were rough. I barely made any money, and I spent hours cold emailing businesses with little to no response. There were days I wanted to give up, days when I thought I'd made a huge mistake. But I couldn't quit. I was too invested now. Then, out of nowhere, I got my first client. It was a local bakery that needed help with their social media marketing. I remember how excited I was when I sent the proposal, and they accepted it. I had no idea how to actually run a campaign, but I figured it out. I learned on the fly, and when the bakery started getting more customers from social media, I realized something. This was it. This was the real deal. From there, things started picking up. I got more clients, and while I still didn't know everything, I learned as I went. I studied marketing, worked with different clients, and figured out what worked and what didn't. I made plenty of mistakes along the way, some costly, some embarrassing, but each failure was a lesson. It wasn't until about 2 years in that I started seeing significant profits. That's when I started thinking bigger. Instead of just doing consulting work, I wanted to create a full-fledged agency. I hired a few employees, outsourced some tasks, and began refining my services. By then, I had learned enough about scaling a business, and I was ready to take things to the next level. The agency grew slowly at first, but it began to snowball. We started getting referrals from satisfied clients, and eventually, the business hit a point where it was self-sustaining. I was no longer working 16-hour days. I had a team that could handle most of the day-to-day operations, allowing me to focus on bigger picture strategies. Now, I've expanded into other areas, and the agency is thriving. It's still not easy, and I'm still learning every day, but I have the freedom to choose how I want to live. I've been able to travel, work from anywhere, and even give back to causes I care about. If there's one thing I've learned through this whole journey, it's that entrepreneurship is not a straight path. It's full of highs and lows, and sometimes you feel like you're running on empty. But if you stick with it, if you embrace failure as part of the process, and if you're willing to put in the work, the rewards are far greater than anything you could imagine. So, for anyone out there feeling stuck in a job they hate or unsure of whether they can make the leap into entrepreneurship, here's my advice. Just take the first step. It doesn't have to be perfect, and you don't have to have it all figured out. But if you don't take that first step, you'll never know what could have been. I'm proof of that. So, here's my story of how I went from a broke 24-year-old with zero business experience to building a successful e-commerce brand that now brings in 6 figures annually. It wasn't easy, and I'm sure there are a lot of bumps ahead, but I feel like it's a story worth sharing, especially for anyone who feels like they're stuck in a dead-end job or just can't figure out how to get their entrepreneurial journey off the ground. It all started about 5 years ago. I had just moved to a new city, trying to find my place in the world after leaving my dead-end job in a tech support call center. I was living paycheck to paycheck, barely scraping by. I had no business background, no mentors, and honestly, I was kind of in a dark place mentally. I had big dreams, but no idea how to make them happen. Sound familiar? One night, I was scrolling through Reddit. Yes, I was one of those people deep in the rabbit hole of personal finance and entrepreneurship subreddits, and I stumbled across a post about drop shipping. It was one of those. I made $50K in my first month posts, which, let's be real, is super common and usually bullshit, but something clicked. I was tired of the cycle I was in, and for once, the idea of starting my own business didn't feel like an unreachable goal. The next day, I spent hours researching drop shipping. I watched YouTube videos, read every article I could find, and joined Facebook groups where people claimed they were crushing it in e-commerce. I didn't have a lot of money to invest, but I figured that if I could make this work, it would be my ticket out of my miserable job and into a life where I controlled my time. I spent the next couple of months trying to figure out the basics. I created a Shopify store and picked a niche, something I thought would be simple: phone accessories. I thought to myself, everyone has a phone, right? Surely people are always buying cases and chargers. At first, I was extremely excited. I found a few suppliers on AliExpress and started listing products. I spent all my savings, like a couple $100 on Facebook ads to get traffic to my site. To say my first few months were a failure would be an understatement. I spent $200 on ads and made maybe $50 in sales. I was crushed. I thought I had done everything right, but the results were dismal. I almost gave up, but something inside me told me not to quit just yet. I had seen success stories. Why couldn't that be me? So, I started tweaking things. I changed my product selection, redesigned my store, and most importantly, I began to focus on what I was doing wrong with ads. I didn't know anything about marketing back then. I was just throwing money at Facebook, hoping it would work. But slowly, I learned about targeting, retargeting, and optimizing my ads for better ROI. The turning point came when I tested different ad copy and images. I still remember the day one of my ads finally hit. It wasn't anything special, just a simple image of a phone case with a discount code. But I started seeing sales trickle in. At first, it was one here, one there. But eventually, it picked up. It wasn't fast, but the progress was real. By month 6, I had made a profit of about $1,500. It wasn't a lot, but it was enough for me to think, okay, this could be something. That feeling was the best. I started scaling the business. For the next year or so, I kept refining my process. I made small tweaks to my store, added more products, and learned a ton about SEO, email marketing, and customer service. My revenue slowly climbed to $5,000 a month. I wasn't exactly rolling in cash, but it was enough to sustain me and eventually leave my day job. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were challenges I hadn't anticipated. First, dealing with customer complaints was rough. I wasn't prepared for how difficult it could be to manage returns, refunds, and angry customers. I learned that good customer service was the difference between success and failure. Over time, I built better communication channels, set up an FAQ page, and started taking extra steps to ensure that customers felt heard. Another major issue was supplier reliability. I had picked my suppliers based on cheap prices, but that didn't always mean good quality or fast shipping times. I remember one Christmas season where I had over 100 orders placed, but my supplier was out of stock on the most popular item. It was a nightmare. I had to issue refunds to a bunch of people, which was a huge blow to my reputation. That was when I realized I needed to be more strategic with my suppliers and find ones that could reliably deliver on time. At this point, I was making enough money to hire a freelancer to help me manage the store while I focused on growing the business. I also invested in more paid ads, specifically Google ads, which brought in much higher quality traffic. It took a lot of trial and error, but by the time I reached my second year in business, I was consistently making around $10,000 a month in revenue. Now, here's where it gets interesting. I had been running my e-commerce store for about 2 years when I realized I wasn't passionate about the niche I was in. I didn't care about phone cases, and I wanted to build something that I felt more connected to. So, I made the leap to rebrand and switch to a new niche, fitness products. That was a game changer. I put all the knowledge I had gathered over the years into rebranding and marketing my new store. I spent more money on professional photography, hired a social media manager to build up my Instagram presence, and worked with influencers to promote my brand. It wasn't overnight, but within 6 months, I saw my monthly revenue jump to $20,000. Looking back, I can't believe how far I've come. From struggling to make $50 in sales to scaling a business that now brings in 6 figures annually, it's been a crazy journey. There were countless sleepless nights, times when I wanted to quit, and mistakes I'll never forget, but it was all worth it. What I've learned along the way is that entrepreneurship isn't easy. There's no magic formula for success, but if you're willing to put in the work, stay consistent, and adapt, it's possible to build something from nothing. It's not about being the smartest or the most talented. It's about being persistent and never giving up, no matter how tough things get. To anyone who's thinking of starting a business or has failed a few times, don't give up. Every mistake is a lesson, and every setback is just a setup for a comeback. Keep going. I was 28 when I realized that working 9 to 5 wasn't going to cut it for me anymore. I wasn't miserable in my job, but I wasn't passionate about it either. I was working as a software engineer for a mid-sized company. It paid well, had decent benefits, and offered the opportunity to move up the ladder. On the surface, I had everything I needed, but deep down, I knew I was living for the weekends and couldn't shake the feeling that I was destined for something else. One evening, while scrolling through Reddit, I stumbled across a post about dropshipping. I'd heard of it before, but never really paid much attention. This post, though, caught my attention. It was from someone who had started a dropshipping store just a few months ago and was making over $30,000 a month in profit. I'd read a lot of success stories before, but something about this one seemed real. Maybe it was the way they explained it, step by step, how they found their niche, researched products, set up their online store, and marketed it. Or maybe it was the fact that they'd done it all while still working full-time. I didn't have much savings at the time, maybe $2,000 in the bank, but I figured it wouldn't hurt to explore this idea further. I did what I thought was the most responsible thing. I spent the next few weeks researching everything I could about dropshipping. I read every blog post, watched every YouTube video, and listened to podcasts about it. I signed up for Shopify, learned about Oberlo, and started looking for suppliers. After about a month of research, I was ready to take the plunge. I still had a full-time job, so I knew this would have to be a side hustle. I didn't want to quit my job just yet because I wanted to be sure this could work. I had $500 set aside for advertising and product testing, so I created a basic Shopify store around a product I thought had potential, a high-quality, customizable yoga mat. The mats were something I was passionate about myself, working out, meditation, yoga, and I felt I could genuinely market it well. The first month was brutal. I spent the $500 on Facebook ads and didn't make a single sale. I was devastated. I didn't want to tell anyone, especially my family and friends, because I felt embarrassed. I'd put my time and money into this, and it wasn't working. But instead of giving up, I decided to analyze everything. I tweaked the ads, adjusted the targeting, and changed up the website design. I learned a lot during those first few months. I learned about the importance of email marketing, improving my product descriptions, and how to target specific audiences based on their interests. I also started doing influencer outreach, which helped bring in some traffic and small sales. Slowly, my store started making sales. At first, it was just 1 or 2 a day, but it was a start. I wasn't getting rich, but it felt like progress. By the 6th month, I was finally breaking even. The store was starting to show some promise. I had refined my marketing strategy and figured out which ads worked and which didn't. I had figured out how to build relationships with influencers and was even starting to get repeat customers. I started to scale. I invested more money into Facebook ads and experimented with Google ads. It wasn't until I hit my first $1,000 month that I began to think I could actually make this work long term. I was still working my 9 to 5, but my store was bringing in more money than my paycheck. It was surreal. I had more freedom than I'd ever had before. I didn't need to ask for time off to go on vacation. I could just take the day off if I wanted. But at the same time, I realized that this wasn't going to be sustainable unless I treated it like a real business. Around this time, I hired my first virtual assistant to help with customer service. It was a game changer. I could focus on the strategic side of things while she handled the daily tasks. I started outsourcing product research, and slowly, my business started running itself. I still checked in every day to make sure everything was going smoothly, but I didn't have to worry about the mundane tasks. The turning point came when I decided to try selling a different product. I'd done well with the yoga mats, but I knew that diversification would be key to growing my business. I decided to try selling eco-friendly water bottles. The niche was growing, and I had a good supplier who offered high-quality products at a reasonable price. I launched the store in conjunction with a targeted ad campaign. Within the first week, I made more sales than I had in an entire month with the yoga mats. That's when I knew I had found something special. The water bottles took off. I quickly expanded to offer additional products like insulated cups, reusable straws, and other eco-friendly items. I reinvested all my profits into advertising and expanding my product line. A few months later, my business was officially making more than my day job. I was making around $5,000 a month in profit, and I hadn't even taken the time to scale properly yet. I was working part-time in my 9 to 5 job and running my online store full-time. At that point, I knew it was time to make the leap. I quit my job, took the plunge, and started focusing solely on my business. It felt terrifying, but also incredibly freeing. I was the boss. I could make decisions based on what was best for the business and not what was best for the corporate hierarchy. I worked harder than I ever had before, but it felt different. It was my business, my future. Over the next year, I built out a small team. I hired more virtual assistants, a content manager, and a customer service lead. The growth was slow at first, but it was steady. I eventually transitioned to using a full-time warehouse for order fulfillment, which improved efficiency and allowed me to focus more on scaling the business. By the time I was 32, my business was making over $200,000 a year in profit. I had finally reached the point where I was financially free. I could travel when I wanted, take time off without worrying about bills, and invest in other business ventures. Looking back, I never could have predicted how everything would turn out. I didn't get here by luck. I put in countless hours, failed over and over, and learned from every mistake. But I also surrounded myself with people who were smarter than me and who helped me along the way. The key was persistence and learning from failure. To anyone reading this, if you're thinking about starting a business, don't wait for the perfect moment. There will never be a perfect time. Take that first step, learn as you go, and don't be afraid to fail. I sure did, but now I can't imagine doing anything else. So, this is the story of how I went from being an overworked, underpaid employee to building my own successful online business. It's not your usual, I had a great idea and everything fell into place type of story. No, this one is about struggle, doubt, resilience, and the importance of being uncomfortable. I always knew I wanted more out of life than just working a 9-to-5 job. But growing up in a modest household, the idea of running a business always felt like a pipe dream. My parents were both hardworking people, but they were stuck in their routines. My dad worked in construction, and my mom worked at a local supermarket. There was no talk of entrepreneurship around the dinner table, just hard work and saving as much as possible. It wasn't until I started working for a small marketing agency in my mid-20s that I even got a glimpse of what it might be like to own a business. At first, the job seemed perfect. I was 25, fresh out of college, and finally working in the field I studied, digital marketing. The pay was decent, and the office had a casual vibe. The problem was, the company was slowly sinking. Clients were leaving, and my boss was barely holding it together. I had no idea how bad it was until I started getting phone calls and emails from the clients who had been abandoned. They were looking for answers, and I had none. That's when I realized the harsh reality. The job I thought was secure wasn't. It was a ticking time bomb. I started looking for a side hustle to bring in some extra income. I tried a few things, drop shipping, affiliate marketing, and even selling digital products, but nothing seemed to click. The biggest hurdle for me wasn't the lack of knowledge, it was fear. I was terrified of failing. What if I put in all this effort and it didn't work out? What if I lost everything and ended up with nothing? But the more I tried, the more I realized that there was no perfect time to start, and the only way forward was through trial and error. Then, one day, I stumbled upon a course about selling digital products. The course was aimed at beginners, and it promised to help you create and sell your own products online. I'd heard a lot of people talk about digital products, but I didn't know where to start. I had no idea what niche to choose, what products to create, or how to even set up an online store. But something about this course felt different. It wasn't just about learning how to sell. It was about creating something valuable that people actually wanted. I took the plunge and invested in the course. At first, it felt like a waste of time. The modules were slow, the content felt basic, and I wasn't seeing any immediate results. But I kept pushing forward, applying what I learned little by little. The more I learned, the more I started seeing gaps in the market. I realized that while people were focusing on creating products in crowded niches like fitness and beauty, there was an underserved market for people who wanted to learn how to make money online. I decided to create a simple ebook and a few video tutorials on how to build an online business from scratch. I had no idea if anyone would buy it, but I decided to go for it anyway. I set up a basic website, created an email list, and launched the product. The first few days were slow. I had a few people sign up for my newsletter, but no one was buying. My heart sank. I started doubting myself again. Maybe this was just another failed attempt at a business. But then, a few weeks later, something unexpected happened. One of my blog posts went viral. It wasn't a huge viral sensation, but enough people started sharing it that it got picked up by some bigger blogs in the make money online niche. People started visiting my site, signing up for my emails, and, eventually, buying my ebook and courses. Slowly but surely, things started to take off. I was finally starting to see the fruits of my labor. The next year was a blur. I was juggling my day job and my growing online business, trying to manage both without burning out. But despite the long hours, the stress, and the endless to-do lists, there was a part of me that was completely invigorated by the challenge. I wasn't just showing up to work every day anymore. I was building something. I was creating something that people found valuable. Eventually, the day came when I had to make a decision. My side business had grown to the point where it was earning more than my full-time job. I couldn't keep up with both, and I was starting to feel overwhelmed. After a lot of soul-searching, I took the leap and quit my job. It was terrifying, but also incredibly liberating. It's been over 3 years since I made that decision, and while I'm not a millionaire or some overnight success, my business is thriving. I've expanded into different niches, built a loyal customer base, and have helped countless people start their own businesses. I've learned so much along the way, not just about entrepreneurship, but about myself. There were so many moments when I felt like quitting, when I questioned whether I was cut out for this. There were nights when I cried, thinking that I was failing. But I kept going. And now, looking back, I can see that the journey was worth it. The biggest lesson I've learned is that you can't wait for the perfect time to start. There's never going to be a perfect moment, and if you keep waiting for it, you'll be stuck forever. You have to start messy, with what you know, and just keep going. Most people give up too soon. If you can push through the hard days, the failures, and the setbacks, you'll be amazed at what you can build. And to anyone out there thinking about starting a business, do it. Don't wait for the stars to align. Take that first step, even if you're scared. You won't regret it. The road is tough, but the rewards are worth it. There's no magic formula. Just hard work, perseverance, and the willingness to keep learning. That's the secret. It was a late evening in the middle of October when I found myself standing in front of the dusty shelves of an old thrift shop, staring at a stack of old books. The store was quiet, with only the hum of a broken air conditioner breaking the silence. I had just moved back to my hometown, having failed at my first attempt to launch a startup in a big city. The city had chewed me up and spit me out. I was broke, disillusioned, and wondering what went wrong. Back in my hometown, the familiar sights and sounds of the small town felt like a distant memory. It wasn't where I saw my future. In fact, it wasn't where I saw any future. But after burning out from the relentless hustle of city life, I needed a break. The shop wasn't anything special, dim lighting, cluttered aisles, and old furniture, but it was the only place open late, so I wandered in to kill time. I wasn't really looking for anything specific. I had lost interest in most things by then. But as I was about to turn around and leave, a single book on one of the shelves caught my eye. It wasn't much to look at, a nondescript, hardcover book with a faded cover that read, "The Art of Resilience." I reached for it without much thought, opened the first page, and began reading. The words on the page felt like they were meant for me. They talked about how failure isn't something to be feared but a necessary part of the process, a lesson I had learned the hard way. But what struck me the most was a line that read, "Every successful entrepreneur has faced at least one moment where they thought it was all over. What separates them is what they do after that moment." It hit me like a truck. My startup had failed, but I wasn't done. Not yet. I bought the book for $2.50 and left the store, feeling like I had just found a hidden treasure. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about it. The words on that page rattled in my mind, forcing me to reflect on what went wrong in my first attempt. My initial venture had been a food delivery app aimed at local businesses. I thought it was the next big thing, but I'd underestimated the competition and overestimated my ability to scale. I had tried to outsmart the big players without understanding the nuances of the market, and it crashed hard. As I sat in my small, one-bedroom apartment that night, the weight of my failure started to feel less like a burden and more like a stepping stone. Maybe the first attempt wasn't supposed to work. Maybe I was just learning the ropes for something bigger. I had failed, but I had gained valuable insights. More importantly, I had learned what I didn't want to do. The thought of trying again, of starting over, didn't feel as terrifying as it once had. In the weeks that followed, I began to reframe my thinking. I stopped looking at my failure as something to avoid and started seeing it as a learning experience. I had learned more from those mistakes than I ever could have if everything had gone according to plan. I began researching other startups, talking to entrepreneurs, and exploring different business models. It was a slow process. I had no money to invest, no big backers to back me up, and I was working part-time in a local coffee shop just to make ends meet. But then, one morning in early December, it hit me. Instead of trying to create something entirely new, why not focus on something that was already successful and build a better version of it? I didn't need to reinvent the wheel. I just needed to fine-tune it. That's when I came up with the idea for my next venture, a personalized, subscription-based delivery service that catered specifically to remote workers and small businesses. The idea was simple. Curate high-quality snacks and beverages from local suppliers and deliver them directly to people's homes or offices. It wasn't a groundbreaking concept, but what set it apart was the focus on quality, variety, and personalization. Each box would be tailored to the preferences and dietary needs of the individual or business, with a rotating selection every month. The more I thought about it, the more it made sense. I didn't have much to start with. I had about $2,000 in savings, which wasn't enough to launch a full-fledged business, but it was enough to get started. The first step was finding suppliers. I reached out to local farmers markets, small batch coffee roasters, and specialty snack makers. I offered them a partnership deal. They would provide their products to me at a discounted rate, and I would promote their brands to my customers. The pitch was simple. You're a small business, and I'm a small business. Let's help each other grow. Getting the first batch of products was a challenge. I spent hours negotiating, tasting, and organizing everything. Then, I built a simple website using a DIY platform. It wasn't fancy, but it worked. The next big hurdle was marketing. I didn't have the budget for ads or big campaigns, so I turned to social media. I began posting about the process, from picking the snacks to packing the boxes. People started to take notice, and the orders slowly began to trickle in. The first month was a blur. I worked 12-hour days, packing boxes, replying to emails, dealing with customer service issues, and trying to keep up with the demand. But with each new order, I felt a sense of pride. I was building something from scratch, something that was mine. Slowly, I started to refine the process, optimizing the logistics, creating better packaging, and offering more customization options. It wasn't easy, but it was working. By the time spring rolled around, the business had grown significantly. I had hired a small team, and we were now delivering to a dozen cities. Our customer base was steadily increasing, and I was able to quit my part-time job. I had officially turned my side hustle into a full-time gig. Looking back, I realized that it wasn't the failure that defined me, but the decision to keep going. I could have easily walked away after my first startup collapsed, but instead, I used that failure as fuel to build something new. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't fast, but it was worth it. The business continued to grow over the next few years, and while I'm not a billionaire or anything, I'm in a much better place now than I was before. My subscription service now serves thousands of customers, and we're working with some of the top brands in the industry. Most importantly, I'm proud of what I've built. That dusty little book from the thrift store? It changed my life. I wasn't supposed to be an overnight success. I was supposed to fail, learn, and keep trying. And that's exactly what I did. I started my entrepreneurial journey at 19, fresh out of high school, without a college degree, and completely clueless about the world of business. What I did have, though, was a lot of ambition, a knack for problem solving, and an unshakable belief that I could turn anything into a profitable venture. I had no clear direction at the time, just an overwhelming desire to make something of myself. So, like a lot of young people, I turned to the internet for answers. What I didn't expect was that the first step towards success would come from a side hustle that spiraled into my first real business. It all started with a simple idea: custom t-shirts. I was browsing Instagram one afternoon, and I saw a couple of accounts selling unique, custom-designed shirts. I'd always been creative and had a few graphic design skills, so I thought, how hard could this be? I can do this too. I didn't have a lot of money, but I knew I could learn about printing and design without investing much upfront. So, I spent weeks reading up on print-on-demand services, YouTube tutorials, and digging into forums. The more I learned, the more excited I got about the possibility of creating a brand from scratch. The next step was to create a logo, a design, and a website. I had no formal training in graphic design, but I figured out how to use free tools like Canva and GIMP to mock up some designs. The first batch of t-shirts I created was based on a theme I was passionate about: gaming. I made designs featuring popular memes and inside jokes from the gaming community. The shirts were simple but quirky enough to grab attention. I launched my first website using Shopify with a basic template. I remember the thrill I felt when I first saw my store go live. It was so unpolished, but it felt like a milestone. I spent the next few weeks promoting it on social media, mostly posting to Reddit and Instagram, hoping someone would see my designs and be interested. At first, I had no sales. Nothing. Zero. Zilch. But I refused to give up. I realized that just having a website wasn't enough. I needed to build a community around my brand. So, I focused more on Reddit. There were dozens of subreddits dedicated to gaming, memes, and streetwear, so I started posting my designs in these communities. I wasn't spamming. I engaged with people, shared my story, and tried to add value. Slowly, people started to notice me. Some would DM me asking where they could get a shirt, and that's when the first sale came in. It was a magical moment. The first sale wasn't much, just $20, but it was a sign that I was on the right track. From there, I started getting more consistent sales. I didn't immediately make a profit, but the fact that people were buying my shirts made me believe this was a real business. I realized I needed to take this more seriously if I wanted to make a living out of it. I started working on the business full-time, dropping out of college and dedicating all my time to growing the brand. Fast forward a year, and the t-shirt business had grown steadily. I was making enough money to cover my rent and bills, but I knew that if I wanted to scale, I needed to diversify. I didn't want to be stuck in the t-shirt business forever. So, I expanded into other products, hoodies, posters, and eventually, custom-designed phone cases. As I expanded, I realized that the key to growth wasn't just in the products I sold, but in the brand I was building. I started investing in better marketing strategies. I hired a small team of freelancers to handle design, photography, and even some paid advertising. This allowed me to focus more on the overall vision of the business. I also started building an email list, which became one of the most valuable assets for my business. I wasn't just selling shirts anymore. I was building a brand that people connected with on a personal level. Around this time, I made a huge mistake that nearly cost me everything. I tried to scale too quickly without properly managing my cash flow. I placed a massive order for inventory, expecting a big return on my investment from a marketing campaign I was planning. But the campaign didn't perform as well as I had hoped. Sales were slow, and I found myself with piles of unsold inventory and mounting bills. I had to get creative. I sold off the excess inventory at a loss just to free up cash and avoid going bankrupt. I also scaled back on my advertising and focused more on organic growth, social media, word of mouth, and building a loyal customer base. Slowly but surely, the sales came back, and I learned a hard lesson about the importance of cash flow management and not overextending myself. After that, the business stabilized, and I started seeing consistent profit. I invested more in customer service, expanding my product line, and collaborating with influencers who genuinely aligned with my brand. My Instagram following grew, my Shopify store traffic increased, and my sales numbers started to reflect all the work I'd put in over the years. In the last few years, I've built my t-shirt business into a full-fledged apparel brand with a dedicated following. I've been able to hire a team, take a few months off to travel, and reinvest profits into new products and marketing strategies. But despite all the success, I'll never forget where I came from. I didn't start with a big budget or a degree in business, just a passion, a lot of trial and error, and the willingness to keep going even when it seemed like failure was just around the corner. I still face challenges, of course. Every entrepreneur does. The business world is competitive, and it takes constant innovation to stay relevant. But every setback is an opportunity to learn, and I'm constantly looking for ways to improve. For anyone starting out, my biggest piece of advice is to take it one step at a time. There will be mistakes, there will be failures, but persistence is key. If you truly believe in your idea and are willing to put in the work, you can make it. Don't get discouraged by the early struggles. They are just part of the journey. In the end, my story isn't about an overnight success, it's about resilience. I learned to adapt, grow, and keep pushing even when the odds were against me. And now, I can say that I'm living my dream. I'm not just an entrepreneur. I'm the owner of a thriving business that I built from the ground up. It's not easy, but it's worth it. For anyone out there trying to get started, just remember, the road might be long, the mistakes will come, and success won't happen overnight. But if you keep going, one small step at a time, you'll get there. Stay hungry, stay curious, and never stop learning. I was 26 when I decided to take a leap of faith. A decision that, at the time, seemed reckless, but now, looking back, I wouldn't have changed a thing. This is my story of how I built a business from scratch, and how failure and success both played their part. It all started when I got my first real job after college. I was fresh out of a marketing program and had this naive optimism that things would fall into place. I landed a solid role at a mid-sized tech company in the city. My desk was in a corner, just far enough from the big boss's offices that I didn't have to engage with them too much. My job wasn't bad, actually, it was comfortable. But that comfort, I realized, was what kept me from dreaming big. Over the next few months, I started noticing something. Most of the people around me, my colleagues, the executives, even some of the people I admired, seemed to be stuck in routines. They were good at their jobs, sure, but they weren't passionate. They were simply doing what they had to do to keep the wheels turning. I didn't want to be like that. I wanted to build something that mattered, something that I could pour my energy into and see grow. I started reading about entrepreneurship. At first, it was just casual reading articles, books, success stories. The more I read, the more I was inspired. It was fascinating to see how people went from zero to hero, how they built businesses from nothing. But the one thing I kept hearing over and over was that it wasn't easy. It wasn't just about having an idea. It was about execution, persistence, and learning from failures. And I realized something important. There would never be a perfect time to start. I was comfortable in my job, but I wasn't satisfied. I felt like I was wasting my potential. So one night after a particularly long workday, I decided that I would go for it. I would leave the corporate world and start my own business. I had no savings, no investors. Hell, I didn't even have a concrete business idea at that point, but I was determined. At first, I thought I could simply make a living doing something I was good at. I had always been a decent graphic designer, so I figured I would start freelancing. I set up a website, posted on social media, and began reaching out to local businesses. I was nervous, unsure of whether anyone would hire me. But to my surprise, the first client came in within a week, a small local bakery that needed some logo work. The project wasn't big, but it was a start. I did everything myself, the design, the revisions, the communication. It was exhausting but exhilarating. That small job led to another, and then another. Soon, I was able to hire a part-time assistant to help with administrative tasks. But even as my client base grew, I realized that I couldn't scale my freelancing business. It wasn't sustainable in the long term. I needed to think bigger. That's when I had an idea. What if I could turn my design skills into a product? Instead of just working for clients, what if I could create a service that would allow people to design their own logos without needing to hire someone? I started researching the market and found that there was a significant demand for affordable, user-friendly design tools. But most of the options were either too complex or too expensive for small business owners. I spent the next few months developing a plan. I would create an online platform that allowed users to create professional logos and graphics on their own. It was a huge leap from the small freelance gigs I had been doing, but I was determined to make it work. I quit my job, went full-time into the business, and dove into coding, design, and marketing. I had no technical background in coding, so I had to learn on the fly. I watched countless tutorials, spent nights troubleshooting issues, and felt completely overwhelmed. But every time I hit a roadblock, I pushed through. I didn't have a choice. I had put everything on the line for this, and failure was not an option. After months of development, I launched my platform. It wasn't perfect, but it was functional. I started reaching out to potential customers through social media and email campaigns, offering them free trials in exchange for feedback. The first few months were slow. The platform wasn't getting much traction, and I was burning through the little savings I had left. I started to doubt myself. Maybe I wasn't cut out for this. Maybe I should go back to a regular job. Then, one day, I got an email from a business owner who had used the platform and loved it. They wanted to sign up for a full subscription. It wasn't a huge deal, but it was enough to keep me going. That single email reignited my passion. It showed me that what I was doing had value, and if I kept going, I could make it work. Slowly but surely, the platform began to gain traction. Word of mouth spread, and more businesses signed up. I reinvested every dollar I made into improving the platform, hiring new team members, and expanding the product offerings. Over the next year, the business grew significantly. We went from a small operation with just a few clients to a full-fledged company with hundreds of users and a solid reputation in the industry. There were still moments of doubt. There were times when I thought we would run out of money or that the business would fail. But I learned to embrace those moments of fear and uncertainty. They were part of the process. Every setback taught me something valuable. Looking back, I realized that the success of my business didn't come from having a groundbreaking idea. It came from the ability to persist when things were tough, to stay focused on the long-term vision, and to constantly iterate on my product. But what really made the difference was the ability to trust myself, even when I had no idea what I was doing. Today, my company is thriving. We've expanded beyond just logo design and now offer a variety of branding tools and services. We've built a strong, loyal customer base, and I've learned to delegate and trust my team. I'm no longer doing everything myself. I've built a business that not only supports me but also supports a team of talented individuals. In the end, entrepreneurship isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up every day and doing the work, even when it seems impossible. You'll face failure, but if you're willing to learn from it and keep going, success will follow. I'm living proof of that. I never thought I'd be telling this story. I mean, who would? It's the kind of thing that sounds like a tale made for the movies, but this is my reality. I started a business from nothing, had no clue what I was doing, and still managed to get to a place where I can say, I made it. At least for now. But it wasn't always that way. In fact, for most of the journey, I was just figuring things out as I went along. If you're someone looking for a neat, packaged success story, this isn't that. What I'm about to tell you is messy, imperfect, and full of failure. But I'll also share the parts that worked, because somehow, against all odds, those things got me here. Let me take you back. It all started about 5 years ago. I was working at a small marketing agency. The pay wasn't terrible, but I was working 50-plus hours a week and getting next to no recognition. To be honest, I had the kind of job where you wake up, go through the motions, and then crash at night, only to repeat it the next day. Sure, I could have stayed there forever, climbed the corporate ladder, and gotten my promotion that everyone told me I should want. But something inside me kept pushing me to do more. The world seemed to be moving so fast with tech, social media, and startups popping up everywhere. I was just stuck. I had no idea what I could do, but I knew I didn't want to keep living this way. So, I started brainstorming. I've always been a creative person, and I've always loved problem solving. That's what drew me to marketing in the first place. But I was getting tired of doing it for other people. I wanted something for myself. So, I did what anyone in my position would do. I dove deep into Google, trying to figure out how people made money outside of the traditional 9 to 5. That's when I started coming across stories of people who built businesses from scratch. Some had no experience, others were working a full-time job while running a side hustle. There were people making money from dropshipping, creating online courses, and even selling products on Etsy. One story really stuck with me. It was about a guy who started an online store selling custom-designed phone cases. He didn't have any special design skills, but he found a niche: phone cases for gamers. He hired designers to make the artwork, and he outsourced the manufacturing. He didn't even handle the inventory or shipping. That was his aha moment, and it got me thinking, what if I could do something similar, but with something I actually cared about? The thing that excited me the most about the idea was the flexibility. I wouldn't need a warehouse or a ton of upfront investment. Just a good idea and the willingness to take risks. So, I did it. I took the plunge. I decided to sell custom-made t-shirts. But I didn't want to just sell random designs. I had to find my niche. That's when I thought about how passionate I was about travel. I loved going to new places, experiencing different cultures, and meeting new people. I started sketching out some ideas, something that would speak to other travelers, something more than just a catchy slogan or a generic logo. I wanted designs that felt personal and authentic. But at the same time, I had zero design skills. So, I found a freelance designer on Fiverr and spent my last $300 to commission some basic artwork for my first few t-shirt designs. I launched my store on Shopify and began advertising through Instagram. Honestly, those first few months were brutal. No one knew who I was. I barely had a following on social media, and the little bit I didn't care about t-shirts. I spent more money than I made. And I mean way more. I remember spending hours every night trying to figure out Facebook ads, tweaking the copy, the targeting, the budget. It felt like I was throwing spaghetti at the wall and hoping something would stick. But after hundreds of dollars in its spend and very few sales, I was starting to lose hope. Then, something clicked. I realized that I wasn't just selling t-shirts, I was selling an experience. I was selling the idea of travel, the freedom, and the adventure that came with it. So I shifted my focus. I stopped pushing the product itself and started telling a story. I started sharing my own travel experiences, the ups and downs, and how these t-shirts were designed to remind people of their own adventures. Slowly, my engagement started to rise. People weren't just liking my posts, they were commenting, sharing, and tagging friends. My Instagram followers started to grow. And most importantly, I was starting to make sales. But even then, it wasn't smooth sailing. I was still struggling to keep up with the production and shipping. I couldn't afford to outsource the manufacturing yet, so I was using a print-on-demand service that took forever to ship products. Customer complaints started rolling in about delayed deliveries. My stress levels went through the roof. I remember spending entire weekends replying to irate emails and trying to figure out how to fix my supply chain problems. It wasn't just about running a business. It was about managing customer expectations and building a reputation from the ground up. I knew I needed to fix the shipping issue if I wanted to grow, so I began looking into other suppliers. After a lot of trial and error, I found a supplier who could deliver products on time without sacrificing quality. I raised my prices a little to cover the added cost of faster shipping, but customers appreciated it. My business started gaining traction, and I could finally pay myself a decent salary. It wasn't much, but it was enough to keep the business going. Fast forward to today, and I'm proud to say that I've been running this business full-time for almost 2 years. We've expanded from just t-shirts to hats, hoodies, and travel accessories. My brand has grown into something that people genuinely care about. We have an engaged community of over 50,000 followers on Instagram, and we've made it into several notable travel magazines. But here's the thing, it's still hard. Every day is a new challenge. I'm constantly working on new designs, marketing campaigns, partnerships, and customer service. The hours are still long, but the rewards are different now. I'm doing something that I'm passionate about, and I'm creating something that resonates with people. The biggest lesson I've learned throughout this journey is that success isn't linear. It's full of twists, turns, and setbacks. What worked for me won't necessarily work for someone else, and that's okay. The important part is staying persistent and adapting to whatever comes your way. There are still days where I question my decision to leave my secure job. But then I look around at my team, the products we've created, and the community we've built, and I know that I made the right choice. So, to anyone thinking of taking the plunge into entrepreneurship, just know that the road is messy. But if you're willing to roll with the punches, keep learning, and stay focused on your goals, you'll get there eventually. And even if you don't, you'll learn lessons you can carry with you for the rest of your life. The journey is the reward. End of story. Thank you for watching until the end. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel so you won't miss new videos. Also, leave a comment. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Your support and engagement mean a lot to me. See you in the next video.